How do you feel about artificial sweeteners? Are they? Is there any watch outs that we should be aware of?
Generally speaking, they're a nothing burger, and there's a lot of scaremongering around artificial sweeteners. But there is one artificial sweetener that has a kind of a crappy track record for both impairing glucose control and also weight gain, and that's saccharin. So saccharin is the one artificial sweetener that's kind of bombed out at the bomb shelter there, as far as the literature is concerned. But the good news about saccharin, by the way, it's the little pink packet things. It's not really commercially pervasive.
So it's not that popular anyway.
No, it's almost commercially extinct. So the other sweeteners like sucralose, aspartame, stevia, or some people call it stevia, they're all fair game. They're all in the same boat, all pretty dang innocuous. And you'd have to consume impossible amounts of those things to incur negative health effects in a lifetime, really.
Because some people have thought that they're potentially carcinogenic, these sort of artificial sweeteners that you find in certain diet beverages.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a leap. That's definitely a leap based on animal data and completely unrealistic doses and conditions that are irrelevant to human physiology. Yeah, it's more dangerous stepping out and breathing in the city air, basically.
What is the most important thing we haven't talked about that we should have talked about, Alan? For the people that are sat at home listening to this.
That's a really damn good question. Okay, so if we look at the things people care about that don't freaking matter in terms of diet, they fixate on weird buzzwords. Like they fixate on they don't even have to be weird words, but like sugar, for example. There has been such scaremongering around sugar to the point that people don't delineate between added sugars to the diet versus sugar that is intrinsic or naturally occurring in foods.
For fruit.
Things like fruit, fresh fruit. And even milk has naturally occurring sugar in it, lactose. Can be problematic for some of the population, but look at fresh fruit. I've actually heard people vilify fruit because it has sugar. And it's one thing to take an idea and put out a plausible claim. Okay, so yeah, it's got sugar. And then, we all know that if you add a ton of sugar to the diet, you lower the quality of the diet, and then you can push your bets towards negative health consequences down the line. Okay, that's fine. That's reasonable. But even though fruit has sugar, it also has a ton of other beneficial components to it. And it's in this low-calorie, high-water, high micronutrient density package that is satiating and displaces stomach space for otherwise junky foods that a lot of people would have consumed instead of that fruit. But beyond all that, forget about all the reasoning and stuff. Let's look at the literature. Does fruit cause negative health consequences? Does it cause things like impaired blood glucose control? Does it cause obesity? Does it cause weight gain? It does the opposite of all those things. Fresh fruit actually has been shown to improve glycemic control, improve body weight, improve body composition, and improve the protection against a range of cardiometabolic diseases and cancer. So it doesn't really matter what anybody says. We just have to face the evidence. There's something called the glycemic index that was big in the 80s and 90s, and it's kind of come back around again. Glycemic index. You gotta avoid the high glycemic index foods and things like that. And there's a couple of fruits that actually have a high glycemic index, and that would be pineapples and watermelons.
Watermelons?
Yeah, high on the GI scale. But the way that glycemic index is determined is you get 50 grams of carbohydrate from a given food, regardless of the amount that you have to eat. 50 grams of it, and then you measure its effect on your blood sugar levels for 2 hours after ingestion.
I was going to say, because watermelon's seen as keto-friendly, which is... But
watermelons have what's called a low glycemic load. So they have a very low amount of carbohydrate per serving.
Yeah, per serving, yeah.
Even though the carbohydrate itself, if you were to gather 50 grams of it, would have a more pronounced effect on blood sugar elevations. And so even though those fruits have a high GI and certain foods have a high GI, they have a low glycemic load. And ultimately, people need to stop and think about things. Like the longest living populations on the planet do not avoid fruit. The fruit is a regular part of their intake.
What about the white stuff? The white sort of added sugar. Is it called refined sugar?
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah,
about
refined, or we can call it added sugar. Mm-hmm.
What about the added sugar?
Added sugar is problematic in two different ways, at least. So the first way is it's diluting the nutrient density of the diet. It's a phenomenon called micronutrient dilution, when you have just a bunch of junk, micronutrient-free calories in the diet. The other way that it poses a problem is because it is usually packaged with highly processed and engineered refined carbohydrate and fat combination foods. So your classic desserts, pastries, cookies, cakes, things like that. And so the sugar itself, if I were to just put a jar of sugar in front of you and say, hey, I challenge you to not just spoon that in, you'll go, oh, no problem. People paint sugar out to be this inherently evil thing, but the way that it gets into trouble is when it is a part of these hyper-palatable, highly processed, highly engineered dessert and snack foods. And so that is the main issue with added sugar. And the various health organizations, I mentioned the Institute of Medicine, or now the National Academy of Medicine, saying, hey, we need to cut off our added sugars at 25% of the diet. There's the World Health Organization, who presents the sort of the absolutely terrified version of that, where they want people to max out their added sugar to 5% of the calories in the diet. But that's usually not realistic. And it gets a little bit extreme to the point of being pathological. So
what would you say?
About 10% of total calories, max, with added sugar. And that would fall kind of right into this discretionary caloric allotment of 10 to 20% of calories, kind of from whatever you want. And I would want to qualify that 10 to 20% margin by saying that if you're hypercaloric, in other words, if you're consuming more calories than you're taking in, you're trying to gain weight or something like that, you probably want to keep your discretionary calorie allotment to 10%, or your indulgence food to 10% rather than 20%.
How many days a week do you go to the gym?
4 to 5.
I'm just trying to confront this question mark in my head about, if you go to the gym 7 days a week, for example, is that not giving your body enough time to rest? But I guess it depends what you're doing there and how hard you're working.
Yeah, and a great example of that is total sets per week.
Okay.
Like you can cram, let's imagine for a given muscle group, you do like nine sets a week or 10 sets a week. You could probably get those in a single session, but it's more productive to probably spread it out over at least 2 days.
How long does it take for me to start to lose muscle?
Oh man, okay. That is a good question and a tough one. So muscle loss happens very rapidly in bedridden individuals. So lean mass, just especially critically ill folks, oh man, goes really fast. Contrast that with you taking a week off or even 2 weeks off, but it's more of like an active rest where you're not just merely sitting around. You could probably go a couple weeks before you start noticing material drops in strength and fitness. 3 weeks, yeah, I think you'll definitely feel that.
And do I need to work out till failure in terms of resistance training and bicep curls or whatever in order to get gains? Do I need to be going all the way until I can't curl it anymore?
It depends on the goal. You mentioned that your goal was to gain muscle.
Yeah.
So in reality, this question is surprisingly more complex than you might hope it's going to be. But okay, when people try to train to failure, and this has been tested out in the research literature, they usually automatically leave 1 to 2 reps in the tank, even 3 reps in the tank. And even resistance-trained subjects, when you tell them to train to failure or leave 1 rep in reserve, they'll routinely leave actually 2 to 3 reps in reserve. So people underestimate their abilities to push. They usually, as almost an automatic margin there that the body sort of regulates and governs and sort of automatically prevents you from going. So with that said, I think that most people can train to failure without worrying about whether they're violating the golden guidelines seen in the literature. It's very common for the consensus in the exercise science community, even in the hypertrophy folks, to say, yeah, leave 1 to 2 reps in reserve. I think that depends on the exercise. So you'd be kind of a fool to be doing lateral raises to think that you can't do partials for lateral raises and still get some benefit out of it. And you'd be kind of a fool to think, yeah, I'm going to do concentration curls here. I'm going to leave 1 to 2 reps in reserve. No, that's different. On the other hand, deadlifting, benching, squatting, these sort of free weight barbell multi-joint types of movements, they're more conducive to leaving 1 to 2 reps in the tank. But for single joint isolation exercises and even machine exercises and lighter loads, where it's safe, take it to failure, man.
We have a closing tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next, not knowing who they're leaving it for. And the question left for you is, how does nature impact on your life?
It has quite a big impact. Yeah, it has an impact. And obviously the environment is important.
I'm wondering through the lens of what you do in terms of, mindset and health and these kinds of things. If you think much about being outside versus being inside. I've even read some interesting studies around people that run outside versus on a treadmill have more sort of have cognitive benefits because the brain is stimulated more.
I think that there's a good amount of literature on the psychological benefits of just being in nature or even getting some sun. And I think that there's epidemiological, like population-based data showing that marine communities tend to be the longevity champs.
Marine, what does that mean?
Communities that live by the ocean or close to the ocean. And
probably all that omega-3 they're eating
Yep.
from the fish.
And that factors in as well, for sure. But that just the kind of almost the metaphysical effect of going to the beach, that's got to play in. And so yeah, I think it definitely has an effect. And I think that there are data that we can point to that says it does.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.